Hello, my name is Jim Falgout, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what's new and what's cooking in Knime Server. We'll start with a quick introduction into Knime Server. Then we'll talk about what's new in Knime Server. This includes single sign-on using OpenID, or what used to be called OAuth, distributing work with executors, and workflow pinning. We'll also talk about what's cooking in Knime Server, and that includes WebPortal updates for business users, supporting executors in the enterprise, and cloud mix. By cloud mix, I mean, what are some scenarios where I can intermix Knime Server large and executors, distributed executors in cloud, on-prem, what does that look like? So we'll walk through some scenarios, and then bringing executors to the edge. All right, a few definitions. When we talk about what's new, we mean features that were added in a previous release of Knime Server. So they're available now for you to use. When we talk about what's cooking, we mean features that are still being worked on. They're still in development. And they'll be available in the next Knime software release. They may be available for preview, limited preview, beforehand. If you're interested, please contact one of us. All right, a quick introduction into Knime Server. You've already heard today about Knime Analytics Platform and how it can help you make just really amazing data science. Once you've done that, what's the next step? Well, you need to productionize it, and Knime Server can help you do that. You can upload workflows to Knime Server, and they can be scheduled for automation. They can also expose a REST API. You can pass data to the workflow, have it execute, and get the results and pass them back through the REST request. This allows you to integrate Knime Server with basically any software within your company. We also have what's called Knime WebPortal. With the WebPortal, you can build workflows that interact with a user. It can ask them questions about maybe the data that they want to analyze, and then provide them visualizations that they can interact with and really help them learn a lot about their data. So you can see with Knime software, we really do provide an end-to-end from data discovery all the way to putting a model in production, a full data life cycle. All right, let's talk about what's new in Knime Server. Single sign-on. Now, we've had single sign-on in Knime Server for quite a while. This is an integration with LDAP and with AD. But now we've integrated with OAuth, which is also called OpenID. This supports using third-party identity providers and integrating them with Knime Server. The identity providers actually know all about your users, their usernames, their passwords, metadata about them. And so when this feature is enabled, Knime Server, when you try to log on to it, will redirect you to one of those identity providers that you've integrated with. Once you've identified yourself, your username, password, whatever that may be, you're then redirected back into Knime Server, and you're fully authenticated. This feature is currently in preview, which means it's out there now. You can use it, but it's still not fully finished. There are several new features that we want to add to make it easier to use and easier to configure, and we're also writing more documentation. All right, right now I'm going to show you a demo of logging into the Knime Server using single sign-on integrated with Auth0, which is an identity provider. I have a browser open to the Knime.com website, and I'm going to demonstrate how when we log into the server, one with OAuth enabled, it's going to actually redirect to the identity provider, and then from the identity provider, once I log in through that, it's going to redirect me then to the Knime Server. Okay, I'm going to open up a private browsing window. So why am I doing that? Well, I'm doing that because I've already logged into the Knime Server for the demo, just to make sure everything worked. And I'm just trying to force it to go to the identity provider. I'll enter in my user ID and password. Hit login, and it should now redirect me to the server, and I'll have my full credentials that I would have, that I would expect to have. So let's see, there's a workflow repository. Let's walk through some of these. I'm going to run this one real quick. So as a web portal, when you build a workflow, you can actually build it to interact with a user. This one doesn't have a lot of interactivity. It's just showing us some data, putting it into a table and a sunburst chart that we can interact with. And these two will actually interact together as I select data. Here, it'll actually select data within there. But that's web portal. I'm just trying to demonstrate how to use OAuth with server. There's a lot more information about WebPortal on the Knime.com website. All right, let me close this window. And I'm going to open up another one that's not a private browsing window, just to show you that once you log in, every time you go to the web server, to the Knime server, you don't have to be redirected to the OAuth provider and re-enter your credentials. Those credentials usually have a time to live, so they won't last forever. So there may be times where you do have to re-log in, but not every time. Okay, that's it. I think that was a nice demonstration of how to integrate Knime server with OAuth and how to use an OAuth provider. Okay, before we get into distributed executors, I wanted to talk a little bit about Knime server and what's its architecture look like and why do we split out the executors. Well, one of the main pieces is a Tomcat web container. That container has all of the business logic of the Knime server. So when you log in with the server, when you upload workflows, when you browse workflows, all of that is done through the Tomcat web container, through that web service that we built. There's also a repository for storing your workflows to make it persistent. And the executor is a piece that actually runs the workflows for you. So when you go to the server and you run that workflow, it gets loaded into the executor and the executor runs it for you. All right, so why do I want to offboard the executor from the server? Well, it really helps to distribute the load of the server and the executor. If you run a really heavy-duty workflow that just uses a lot of CPU, that can affect the actual interaction of the server with other users. So offloading those two makes it much more interactive. You can also support different types of executor runtimes. So you might want different versions of Python, or you might want to be able to have GPUs on certain machines. With distributed executors, you can do that. And offboarding the two also makes it available for you to add more executors. So you just add more compute power when you need it. That's called scaling out. Okay, this is what distributed executors looks like. We've taken the executor part and completely removed it from the server. It's in a different VM or a different machine altogether. And you can have multiple of them. Here I'm showing 4, but you can have as many as you need. This provides just an amazing amount of deployment flexibility. And we're going to talk about some of that flexibility here in a few minutes when we get into some of the cloud mix scenarios. All right, you may wonder, how is this licensed? Well, it's licensed as normal. So within the Knime server, you get a license that allows you to have so many cores. When an executor integrates with the Knime server, starts up and wants to talk to it, the server says, how many cores do you have? The executor can say, I have 8 cores. And the server would then give it a license for 8 cores. And then each of the executors, when they come up, would do the same. And so you see, you put your license on the server, and the executors will register and get the parts of the license that they need. Okay, workflow pinning is a new feature that we added in the most recent release of Knime server. So why did we do that? Because we had people asking us, well, I have these distributed executors. I have the capability of making them different, right, to support different environments. So when I run a workflow, how do I enforce that workflow to go to one of the executors that I want it to? Well, that's where workflow pinning comes in. You can actually tag the deployed workflow to say, here are the capabilities that I would like. For example, we have this workflow tag for GPU and Python. When you actually run it on the server will try to pick the best match that it can find for those capabilities. So in this example, we push this workflow to the server, we deploy it, we run it, and the server says, oh, okay, you're looking for GPU and Pythons, I have an exact match for those capabilities, and it runs the workflow on that executor. All right, let's talk about what's cooking in the Knime server. Remember, these are new features that we're working on currently, and they'll be out hopefully in the next release, if not the release after. The new WebPortal. So we heard a lot of feedback about WebPortal, that it seemed to be designed for developers and business users, analysts, people who are not, software developers. They were getting confused by it. It was just hard to use. So we've totally redone the UX design of it. For example, there's a landing page for a workflow. It talks all about the workflow, tells you how to use it. All that documentation is written by the workflow designer, and it's exposed here. There's also 2 very handy links. One link is allow you to set a bookmark for this page, kind of the landing page for the workflow. The other one gives you actually an executable link into the workflow. If you click on it, the workflow is already running and ready to go. So it kind of helps you bypass the landing page and you can get a quicker start. When a workflow is running, this page will show. That way it shows you what's going on with the workflow. Is it still working? How long has it been working? So it gives you a little bit more feedback about what's happening. And then on this last page, we can see very interactive usage of the graphics within this page. And also, you can see it has a black background. So those of you who like kind of a dark view with your windows, you can see this is very extensible to be able to support that. Okay, supporting executors in the enterprise. What does that look like? So what's the scenario? You may want to segregate execution resources by department. Why would I want to do that? Well, let's say I have some executors that I'm using for a particular department. Another department comes online using Knime server. Great, they use the same executors. Now all of a sudden, the first group is complaining because they're starting to lose some of their capabilities. They're not having access to the executors that they kind of purchased, right? So you might want to segregate that by department for budgetary reasons, or even for security reasons. How do you do that in Knime server? Well, we introduced a new thing called executor groups. This is just a way of managing a logical group of executors. And you can also manage access to that executor group, either by user or by user group. And you can map it into an executor group. For example, in this scenario, we have two groups already defined, one for finance and one for engineering. So if someone from finance runs a workflow, they deploy it to the server, execute it gets routed to the executive group that's assigned to the finance group. But let's say the finance group and the marketing group were having lunch together, and the finance group said, you need to use Knime server, it's amazing. Great, so the marketing group goes to IT and says, we need to start using Knime server. How do we get started? The admin then adds a new group, and then adds a new executive group, and maps it to the marketing group. So now when someone from marketing wants to run a workflow, they push it to Knime server, they run it, and it gets run in the correct executive group for the marketing team. All right, Cloud Mix. There are two new offerings that we're pushing out to the AWS and the Azure marketplaces soon. That includes Knime Server Large, BYOL. BYOL is bring your own license. So you would have to come to Knime, purchase a license, and then you could deploy this on the cloud. It supports Server Large with the distributed executors. And so we talked about distributed executors earlier and all the reasons why you might want to use them. This also has an embedded executor so that when you start it, it can work standalone until you get distributed executors integrated with it. The second offering will be Knime Executors. These will be distributed executors that can be used by Knime Server Large. So once you start Server Large in the cloud, you can also start a group of executors and have the two work together. You can do this in two different ways. One is through pay-as-you-go, which is PAYG, that offers support for elastic scaling. And by pay-as-you-go, what we mean by that is you pay an hourly charge for each instance or worker that you have running. And that's paid through your cloud account, whether that be Amazon or Azure. The second type is called BYOL, or bring your own license. This offering uses cores from your server license, as we discussed earlier. Okay, another way to use distributed executors in the cloud is through what's called auto-scaling. Why do you need auto-scaling? Well, you may have workloads that vary, and workload spikes are causing issues because of high loads. Jobs are getting backed up over time. How do you solve that? Well, in the cloud, with pay-as-you-go executors, you can actually have the number of executors scale to meet demand. Scale out is when you add an instance. For example, we have 3 executors here in this example. Knime server is getting overloaded with jobs, so we add another executor. Over time, the load may go down, and so that means we can actually get rid of that extra executor and terminate it. So why would we want to do that? That's called a scale-in event. Well, we want to terminate it because we're not using that. We don't need it anymore. The load has gone down. We can actually get back to maybe a lower level of cost. So it's about cost savings. You can, with these auto-scaling groups, maintain a base capacity of computing. So for example, you may want 2, 3, whatever that number is, number of executors always up to meet demand, especially like of interactive users. And then over time, you can grow that and shrink it depending on load. Another common scenario is a hybrid scenario. This is where you have a mix of on-premise and cloud. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, you may have data that you want to analyze, and it's only available on the cloud. It's so much data that you don't want to move it into your data center. So you wanted to be able to start Executors in the cloud and be able to use those Executors with your on-prem Knime server. Also, you may need to meet periodic demands. You have peaks in demand that happen maybe seasonally. So this will allow you to bring up extra compute capacity so that you can meet that demand. And when it passes, you can throw those away. And again, it's back to cost savings. Or you may need specialty hardware like GPUs for a specific project. Or you may want to do testing. So that way you can bring up resources within the cloud, do your testing, and when you're done, throw those resources away. Another common scenario is a mixed cloud usage. And by that I mean a mix of bring your own license and pay as you go. Okay, so where would that make sense? Again, the periodic demand, even on cloud. If you have a set license, like in this example, we have some BYOL executors that are hooked up to our Knime server. But there are cases where we may want to augment that with additional resources. And that's where we could use pay-as-you-go. Again, when those pay-as-you-go executors are no longer needed, you can just terminate them, and then you don't pay for them anymore. That really could come in handy if you have like different budgeting needs between different departments, or maybe you even want to have executors working in different cloud accounts. You can see you can mix and match this as much as you like, and we support all of those scenarios. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is bringing executors onto the edge. So what do we mean by that? So if you have a Knime server and you want to be able to execute workflows that take data in, that do some sort of analysis, or really more of apply an algorithm or a model and return an answer. And you want to deploy that to hundreds, maybe even thousands, or maybe even more end users where there may be spikes in demand. Also, you need that latency to be really low and to be very consistent. And by latency, I mean the time from when you make a request till it gets processed by the server and then sent back to you as an answer. So that's that round trip time, we call that latency. You always want that latency to be as low as possible, especially as you get lots of users using the system and causing maybe latency to increase. And then you see interactivity kind of not being as great as you would like it to be. You also want to update models and workflows periodically. Models, once they're built, they don't last forever. Over time, data changes, behaviors change, and so your model has to be rebuilt and redeployed. You want that to be as automated as possible. And within some sort of like factory setting, you also may want to replicate deployments to multiple remote sites and have them interact with Knime server in a way that you can automatically deploy new workflows when you need to and have them deploy to all of those edge sites. Okay, so we talked about Knime Score. TBN, by there I mean is to be named. So we've had feedback that Knime Score is not a great name. This is really an internal name that we've been using to go, to kind of, so that we know what we're talking about when we talk about Knime Score. That name will change over time. So there are two main components of this Executors on the edge. There's a Knime server. So the Knime server is used for management and monitoring of workflows and edge instances. It provides continuous deployment. So if you look at this scenario with the architecture, we have Knime server and we have 4 edge locations that we're supporting with that server. Whenever I deploy a workflow to the server that is destined for one of the edges, it will deploy to all of the edges that it needs to. Okay, what does the edge scorer do? Well, the edge scorer takes a workflow and then wraps it in a container, a Docker container. It then provides an API endpoint for that workflow, so you can invoke it. And it also manages scaling. So let's say I deploy a workflow and I tell the edge scorer I want to have 2 instances running all the time, but you can scale up to as many as 20. What does that mean? That means as people start using that API to invoke that workflow, as the number of requests increase and the load increases, and we start to see latency start to stretch out and get longer, we'll start up more instances so that we can handle that load. Okay, that's all I really want to talk about today. First, I want to thank you for being here. This is new to us, this virtual environment, but thank you for joining the virtual summit and being part of this. We really appreciate it. This is Virtual Me. I'm going to talk to you soon with questions and answers. Thanks a lot.